Hi, I'm David from Not Brewing, and today I'm going to show you, from grain to glass, how I made a clone beer of Orkney Dark Island. It's a dark ale, a cross between a best bitter and a porter, with the refreshing mouthfeel of the bitter and the roast malts of the porter coming through. This beer has twice won the Scottish Beer of the Year award as determined by the Campaign for Real Ale, so it's a delicious beer. Now, I've only ever drunk this beer in cask, so I'll be looking to see how my homemade version stacks up, as mine won't be in cask. So without further ado, now let's take a look at the recipe that makes up this beer. Now I will be making an 11 litre batch, and for that I need a range of different grains. 85% is made up of Otter Pale Ale malt. This is the British base malt. To that I will be adding 6% of chocolate malt, and this is the dark malt in the list. Now this is less bitter and roasty than roasted barley or black malt, which means it can add colour and a mild chocolate character, without some of the harsh roasty flavour that some other malts can impart. Then I will be adding 4.4% of wheat malt. Now, aside from beers mostly made from wheat, like Weiss beers or Hefeweizens, wheat is very often contained in smaller quantities in British beers. It adds a soft, crisp flavour and has a higher protein and gluten content than barley, which contributes to higher foam or head stability, and it makes for a slightly fuller mouthfeel. It can also make the beer hazy, but because we're only using 4.4%, this won't impact clarity significantly. And finally, we're adding 4.3% of light crystal. This will add some caramel sweetness notes to the beer and contribute to the colour also. Looking at the overall malt bill, the use of chocolate kind of pushes it into the porter territory, but without any of the black grains. The light crystal and the wheat malt sit in the best bitter camp. Now the hops are all added at the beginning of the boil with 60 minutes to go, and are made up of East Kent Goldings and First Gold. East Kent Goldings are incredibly common in British bitters and bring a floral, spicy and earthy aroma and flavour. First Gold hops are slightly less earthy and bring more herbal, fruity notes. Some even describe tangerine, apricot and orange marmalade amongst those flavours. Both these hops are in pellet form and are added in equal measure. For the yeast, I'm using Fermentis SafAle SO4 dry yeast, British ale yeast. Like other British ale yeasts, this ferments quickly and is also a good flocculator, which means that when its work is done, it clumps up with other yeast particles, which means it drops faster. This leaves the beer nice and clear. It adds fruity and floral character to the beer, so is a perfect blend with the hops also. I've also included my target water profile if brewers are looking to recreate the water chemistry. If not, mineral water would be fine, or regular tap water. With tap water, you need to make sure that you first remove the chlorine. And this is best done for a batch this size with half a Camden tablet. Collect all the water beforehand, so that's 6 litres for the mash and 9 litres for the sparge, 15 litres in all. Add the half Camden tablet, then leave it for 30 minutes to stand before you start brewing. Before we start the mash, let's take a look at the equipment. Starting on the left hand side, you've got the thermometer with the temperature probe going into the 15 litre mash tun. And the two pans either side are sharing the 9 litres of sparge water. In terms of other equipment, I've got the grain bag and hop bag in the middle there, my mash paddle and spoon, and a ruler for measuring the wort volume. I've got a funnel and a sieve, and a heavy pair of black gloves to stop my hands from burning. In beginning the mash process, I first put my grain bag inside the pan and hook the loops over the pan's handles. And then I heat up the strike water to 71 degrees centigrade before I start adding the grain. Now you can see that I'm adding the grain slowly and stirring thoroughly. It's worth taking a bit of time here because what you don't want is dough balls, and you want every grain to be covered in water as well. So take your time, pour it in slowly and make sure it's fully integrated. By which time your mash water temperature will have lowered from 71 degrees C to the desired mash temperature of 65. Now I've spent a good few minutes here, so I'll speed it up so you're not watching it real time. Of course, the reason that you want all the grains properly covered with water is so that the enzymes get good access to the starchy interiors of the grain. Convert that starch into fermentable sugars. When the mash temperature has been reached, stop stirring, put the lid on the pan and then wrap the entire pan in a thick blanket. I use a sturdy spring clip here to hold the blanket in place. Now you'll have seen from my previous video that I just put the mash pan entirely within the oven, but I wanted to show the other common way that homebrewers use to maintain mash temperature. Every 15 minutes or so, take the lid off the pan and give it a good stir. This equalises the temperature within the pan and also distributes the enzymes more evenly around the mash water. Then when you've finished stirring, put the lid back on and refasten the blanket as before. Do this throughout the whole hour, at the end of which most of the starch will have been converted to fermentable sugar. As soon as the mash is finished, you can lift the grains out of the pan to drain. You'll see that I'm wearing my black gloves here for heat protection, so as soon as you can, lift out the grain bag and rest it on a colander or a sieve so that it's sat on top of the pan draining. Now you only have to wait a little while until most of the heavy drips have stopped. I move the colander off the top of the pan because it protrudes too far into the pan for all the sparge water to fit underneath it. So I move it to another bucket with an oven grill on top of it, and I can do my sparge there. Take a jug of the sparge water at 77 degrees C and pour it gently over the grains as if you were making a filter coffee. Once again, take your time here. It's important that all of the remaining sugar is rinsed out of the grain. You want the drain water to seep slowly through, so don't pour too fast or you'll bore holes in the grain, which will mean that you won't get the right level of coverage. When you've finished pouring all 9 litres of the sparge water through the grains, you're now ready to squeeze the bag. If you weren't using a bag, you'd have to wait until all the water had drained naturally. But you don't have to. You can squeeze this to get rid of all the water quicker. You might as well lean into it. Look how much is coming out. Put all your sparge water in the kettle and start heating to boiling point. While you're waiting, you can pre-weigh out your hops. Now all the hops are in the 60-minute pot, but in the 15-minute pot, there's some whirl-flock clarifier. As the wort begins to warm towards boiling point, you'll notice a smooth layer of foam on top. This is good. This is protein coagulating on the surface of the wort. Very close to boiling point itself, you'll notice that the foam will clear a little area so that you can see the surface of the wort underneath. There it goes. Again, I've sped this up, but you can see the surface getting more bumpy and exposed. At this point, I like to stir the surface to reintegrate the protein back into the wort. Some people skim it off, but over time you'll find that these protein clumps will coagulate and drop out of the solution to the bottom of the kettle. This is called the hop break. Now start your boil timer for 60 minutes and you're ready to add your first hop addition. I pour the hops into the muslin bag and then dip it inside the wort and swirl it around so that the water gets exposed to all the bits inside the bag. I've just lowered the intensity of the heat momentarily while I add the hops because adding the hops can sometimes cause a boil over also. I tie up the bag and leave it there, and then occasionally stir the wort from time to time. With 15 minutes to go, there's a couple of things I need to do. I need to add the 15-minute addition. Now, there's no late hops in this batch, so I'll just be adding half a whirlflock tablet and some yeast nutrient. Whirlflock is made up of carrageenan amongst other things, which is an extract of seaweed, and this has long been used by brewers to clarify beer. The other thing I need to do is add my immersion chiller. Now this is a copper pipe coiled up through which we pass cold water, and this helps to bring the boiling wort down to room temperature so we can pitch the yeast safely. Putting it in the wort with 15 minutes to go will sterilise it so that it doesn't introduce any nasty bacteria to the beer. Once the boil is finished, I sanitise the lid and put it back on to again stop any bacteria dropping in, and then move the pot to the place where I'm going to chill it. Then I hook up the water pipes, insert my temperature probe, turn on the thermometer, a quick reveal that it starts at 90 degrees C, then start the water. You see, I'm just checking that the water's running through here, then I'm looking around the tap area for leaks, and this here is the temperature coming down in real time. It's pretty quick. It's fair to say it's only measuring the temperature of the water round the thermometer, not the entire kettle. So every now and then I'll take a sanitised spoon and stir it up to distribute the temperature evenly in the wort. I finally lift out the hop bag and place it in a bowl on the side. Then lift out the immersion chiller and put that on the side also. Sanitize the lid one more time. Show you the final temperature, which is 18 degrees C, so we've reached exactly where we intended. Safe for pitching yeast. I'll now measure the post-chill volume, and this is a measure of how much beer is going to end up inside the fermenter. Then I lift the pan out to pour it into the fermenter. You can see I've poured it here. I've got a full fermenter and a careless splash on the floor. I just want to take a moment to talk about measurements. You may have noticed that I use a ruler to measure the wort volumes in the mash tun and in the kettle, using it like a dipstick. In addition, you can also track the specific gravity. This is a measurement of the amount of sugars in solution in the wort. By knowing what the specific gravity is before fermentation, known as the original gravity, and then again after fermentation, known as the final gravity, you can calculate the alcohol by volume, the percentage of the beer. Secondly, when you're learning to brew, it can be really handy to monitor your process and work out what is happening where. If you don't, you will end up with lovely beer either way. But if, as in this instance, you want to clone a specific beer or reproduce a recipe that you've made before, then it can be helpful to hone in on the details. For this brew, I did make a change. I ordered my grain from the malt miller, as I've done before, but this time I ordered a fine crush instead of a normal crush. This meant that I ended up converting more of the sugars during the mash. I didn't want to end up with a beer that was much stronger than Dark Island, so it was important to take measurements. What can you use to measure specific gravity? You can use a hydrometer. This is a glass tube that floats in the wort and has a scale that measures the gravity for you. You normally use it in a measuring jar as shown. You can also use a refractometer. You put a couple of drops of wort in the reading window and then look through it, and you can see a scale that shows you the gravity in specific gravity or bricks. For this brew, after chilling the wort, I ended up with an original gravity of 1053. The starting gravity was meant to be 1047, so I had to add 1 litre of pre-boiled and cooled water to the fermenter before I pitched the yeast. This brought the gravity down to the desired level of 1047. I then fermented this batch for 14 days in the broom cupboard underneath my stairs. It hit final gravity within 3 days, but I left it there for a full 2 weeks so that the yeast could clean up any off flavours such as diacetyl. As it happened, I couldn't transfer it to keg after 14 days as life got in the way, but on day 18 I did manage to. I took the final gravity using a hydrometer, and as you can see here, The final gravity was 1010. This was lower than I expected. I expected 1012 as a final gravity, so the final ABV was 4.85% instead of 4.6%. So if I hadn't measured the gravities, I would have produced a beer that was 5.6%. If I wanted the final gravity to be 1012 instead of 1010 it ended up being, then I would change the mash temperature from 65 degrees C to 67 or 68 degrees C. When I brew it again, I will make that change and hopefully track it in the gravity measurements. What else have I learned? I've learned that I can actually order less grain next time and still get the right levels of sugar out without having to water it down. This will give me slightly higher hop utilisation also, so I can save a few pennies on grains and hops. Right, without further ado, let's get into the tasting. So here we are at the tasting. This is the Orkney Dark Island clone, which I've called Bewley Brothers. Bewley is a town on the Inverness Peninsula, which is Dark Island. It's not actually an island, but there you go. And in terms of fermentation, it fermented out to final gravity of 1010, which is more than I was expecting. I thought it was going to ferment out to 1012, but it went drier than that. So the ABV is now 4.9 instead of 4.6. Not much in it. Be interesting to see what difference that makes in the mouth. Right, well, let's have a look at it. This has been bottled from the keg, so should be where it needs to be. I don't need to worry about sediment. So the first thing to notice is, in terms of the appearance, is its foamy head. Carbonation is there, but I've had to splosh it a bit to get a bit of head. Having said that, it looks good in the glass, and if I hold it up towards the light, you can maybe just see there's a bit of a ruby edge at the bottom of the beer. I don't know if you can see that, whether that came out at all. Aroma, right. So the first thing I get is hop, earthy and herbal. A little bit of mustiness there, sort of classic British noble hop. And then I get the malt, so I get this toasty malt, and I get this sweet sort of caramelly, chocolatey nose coming through as well. Just a minor amount, but I can smell it. Right, let's try mouthfeel. Yeah, so it's very refreshing and light feeling in the mouth. It's a light to medium body. I wouldn't say that's too thick a mouthfeel at all. Carbonation's actually perfect for the style. I guess it's a little more carbonated than you would get from a car scale. But you know, it is a car scale predominantly, so you know, I want to emulate that mouthfeel. It finishes quite dry as well, which allows the bitterness from the hops to be accentuated at the end as well. So it finishes quite dry, which means you want another one straight afterwards. Because of the clean fermentation profile I had, there's some fruity esters at the beginning which just push forward that sort of chocolate caramelly kind of edge. But there's no off flavors, there's no hotness from fusel alcohols or anything like that. It's a very clean profile. I would say that you get quite a bit of front-edged sort of toasty malt, and then in the mouth then caramel and chocolate rises a little bit. And then the bitterness of the hops comes through and sticks around quite a bit. So you're left with a slightly bitterness from the roast and bitterness from the hops as well. I think, bearing in mind that this fermented all the way out to 1010, I think I would mash at a higher temperature next time. Rather than at 65, mash at 68, so that you know, there was a little residual sugar left, and then the middle portion of the malt, so you know, you get toasted malt and then it fades a little bit, that would stick around a bit longer, and I think it might feel a bit fuller in the mouth. But you know, it isn't a stout, it isn't a porter, even though it looks a bit like one. It's a you know, a strong best bitter effectively, that's got some dark colour and malts in it. What would I do differently? Well, I get a nice aroma of hops at the beginning, but it is a little bit bitter feeling at the end. That could be the dryness, but I think I'd be inclined to push a third of the hop volume to the end of the boil for aromatics, so that there wasn't quite so much IBU bitterness. I would mash at a higher temperature so it had a fuller feel. And I think that's probably about it. I think the recipe's about right. So that's it. That's the Orkney Dark Island clone. You've seen me brew it, you've seen me taste it. Have a go yourself. Feel free to leave comments below and let me know what you thought of the video or the process, or any other questions you might have. And if you want to see more of this, then let me know. Like and subscribe. Thank you. Happy brewing, and I'll see you soon.